Pronouns. Pronouns are words that stand in for nouns. In the sentence, Brandon told Ellen she needed her raincoat. There are two pronouns, she and her, and the antecedent Ellen. The antecedent is the word that the two pronouns are standing in for. If we didn't have pronouns, we would have to say Brandon told Ellen needed Ellen's raincoat. Instead, we use pronouns. There are 7 main types of pronouns. Personal, reflexive and intensive, which we'll learn together. Demonstrative, interrogative, relative, and indefinite. We'll start with personal. The personal pronouns are all the words we use to talk mostly about people. We use them when talking about yourself, talking to someone, or talking about someone. Reflexive and intensive pronouns are also about people, but they have specific uses that we'll explain in a bit. For now, remember that they all end in self or selves. Demonstrative pronouns, that, this, these, and those, are all used to point out something such as that is mine, when it's obvious what that is. The interrogative pronouns, what, which, who, whose, whom, are all used in questions. The relative pronouns, that, which, who, whose, whom, are used to begin adjective clauses. With little practice, they are easy to spot in sentences. And finally, the indefinite pronouns are all the words that stand in for unknown antecedents. Words like somebody, many, and most stand in for some person, thing, or amount that we don't know. So we have to use these indefinite pronouns to talk about them. These are the main types of pronouns. You might have noticed that some words appear on more than one list. That makes identifying them in sentences a little trickier, but sentences always have plenty of clues. We'll start with the personal pronouns. All personal pronouns are either singular or plural, but they're also divided into 2 more categories, nominative and objective. In both categories, the pronouns are used for either first person, which is the speaker, second person, which is the one spoken to, and third person, which are the ones spoken about. The singular nominative pronouns are I, you, he, she, and it. The singular objective pronouns are me, you, him, her, and it. The plural nominative pronouns are we, you, they, and the plural objective pronouns are us, you, and them. The nominative pronouns are always used as either subjects or predicate nominatives. The objective pronouns are always used for direct objects, indirect objects, or objects of the preposition. Reflexive and intensive pronouns always end in self or selves and are needed whenever we're talking about any person's self. Reflexive pronouns have an actual job in a sentence. Intensive pronouns don't. They're just added for emphasis. So reflexive pronouns have one of these jobs: indirect object or direct object or object of the preposition. In the sentence, Brian gave himself 5 more minutes of sleep by hitting the snooze button. Himself is reflexive because it is the indirect object. In the sentence, Brian hurt himself when he jumped from the top bunk. Himself is reflexive again because it's the direct object. In the sentence, Brian decided to go by himself. Himself is still reflexive because it is the object of the preposition by. All 3 of these examples were reflexive because they all were actually some specific part of the sentence. On the other hand, intensive pronouns are never one of those parts of the sentence. They are simply added for emphasis and can be removed from the sentence. In the sentence, Brian tied his shoes himself. Himself is intensive because it isn't a DO, IO, or an OP. It's just making a big deal out of Brian's accomplishment. Intensive pronouns aren't needed and aren't missed when they're taken out of a sentence. Demonstrative pronouns stand for the noun or noun clauses of phrases that aren't really necessary in certain situations. This, that, these, those are the demonstrative pronouns, but they're also the demonstrative adjectives, which could be confusing, but more about that later. Most people who are asking, what is the gross smelling mess in your lunchbox, would be looking at the mess in person and would probably skip right past the gross smelling mess in your lunchbox part and replace it with that, saying, what is that, while pointing. You both would know what was meant. In a situation where you were walking around a track all day with a friend, you might skip over the walking around the track all day part and skip right to, this is boring. You'd both know what this was. And you could say, I'll take one of the cookies on the top shelf, or you could point and say, I'll take one of those. Everyone would know what you meant by those. Demonstrative adjectives don't really belong in a pronoun lesson, but they are easy to confuse with demonstrative pronouns since they're the same words, so they're mentioned here. Demonstrative adjectives always have a noun right after them. So, when are these words pronouns and when are they adjectives? In the sentence, these donuts are delicious. These is an adjective because it tells which donuts. The same sentence and the same word becomes a pronoun when donuts is removed from the sentence because now these stands in for donuts. Interrogative pronouns are used in questions. What, who, whose, which, whom. What is wrong? Who are you? Whose coat is this? Which one do you like? And whom are you inviting to the party? What, who, whose, which, whom all begin with WH. Relative pronouns introduce adjective clauses and describe the noun that comes just before the clause. The relative pronouns include who, that, whose, whom, and which. We'll give examples for each one starting with who. In the sentence, he is the man who crashed the drone. Who crashed the drone is an adjective clause describing the man. Therefore, who is the relative pronoun that introduces the clause. Here's an example for that. In this sentence, the man is being described differently. He is the one that was here yesterday. That is a relative pronoun that introduces the adjective clause. Now the man is the one whose dog we found. Now he is the man whom we all admire. Which doesn't really work with people, so in the sentence, this is the school which he attends. Indefinite pronouns are words that stand in for people, things, or amounts that we don't really know. When we want to mention a person we don't know, we say somebody or someone. When we want to name a thing that we don't know, we say something or anything. When we want an amount that we don't know, we say some or many. Check the list in your book for other examples of indefinite pronouns.